Have you ever thought about exploring the world of artificial intelligence? Well, this summer, AI Camp is hosting a summer camp where you can explore and dive into the AI field. This camp is a full-time, 3 weeks, hands-on learning experience where you and other students can work together in small groups to build and deploy AI apps. There's no prior coding experience necessary, and you'll have the option to explore different domains of machine learning like natural language processing, computer vision, and reinforcement learning. You'll join a community of hundreds of students and AI Camp staff who are all passionate about artificial intelligence. And depending on how you perform during the camp, you could potentially land internship opportunities. So who is this camp for? This camp is for teenagers 18 and under who have an interest in the AI space. And the best part about it is you can apply for scholarships to attend the camp. Last summer, AI Camp gave about 60% of their students a partial scholarship, and 10% of students got a full scholarship to attend the camp. So if you're under 18, if you have an interest in the AI space, check the link in the pinned comment. Go ahead, click that link and apply. It's a great opportunity to learn about AI and to get your feet wet and to really get started in this space. The deadline to sign up is March 1st, 2022. Click the link in the pinned comment and sign up. What's up, people? It's DevSage here, and in this video, we're going to be building a full stack Node.js application. We're going to be building a Node.js application that uses natural language processing in order to take some sentence and convert it into its past tense form. We're going to be doing that with natural language processing, or NLP. If you don't know what NLP is, natural language processing is basically a branch of artificial intelligence that is concerned about giving computers the ability to parse and to understand text and spoken words, much in the same way that human beings can. And there's a whole lot of complicated math and stuff involved under the hood. So we're not going to get into any of that in this tutorial. You don't need any prior knowledge of AI or NLP. We're going to be using a JavaScript natural language processing library called Compromise that basically will do all the heavy lifting for us. So let's just take a look at our application and see what it can do. So let's say we wanted to put into this box here. Let's say I can do it, and I press enter, and then the output is I could have did it. So this is taking this sentence here and converting it into its past tense form. Instead of I can do it, I could have did it. Let's get another example. So let's say I'm reading a book and it's really good. Press enter. I read a book and it was really good. So let's get one more. So let's say, hey, I'm walking here. Instead of I'm walking here, it says, hey, I walked here. So yeah, we're just taking in whatever sentence we put in here and converting it into its past tense form. So now let's take a little bit of a higher level look at what the architecture of our app is going to look like. All right, so before we get into actually writing the code for our application, let's see how we're going to design it. So the first piece we're going to have is our front end, which is basically what you saw just now with the text box that's going to take in some sentence. And we're also going to have our back end, which is going to be our Node.js server, which is basically going to receive our input, and it's going to run that sentence through the compromised library, and it's going to return back the past tense version of whatever that sentence is. So right now we have our front end making requests to our back end. So let's take a look at what our API is going to look like on the back end, what our API contract is going to be. Well, we're only going to have this one endpoint in our API, which is going to be a GET request to the past tense endpoint. And with this GET request, we're going to pass in a query string argument of sentence equals XYZ, or whatever sentence we want to convert to past tense, we're going to pass it through as a query string parameter. And that's it. That's going to be our only endpoint here. So if we go back, so we have our front end and our back end, and our contract between our front end and our back end is going to be a GET request to the past tense endpoint, passing in a sentence query string argument with whatever sentence we want to get the past tense version of. Okay, so let's jump into the code. All right, so to start off, I'm going to assume that you already have Node.js installed. So let's just go ahead and start with installing some of our dependencies. And the first dependency we're going to need is actually a global dependency called nodemon. So nodemon is basically a node package that lets you run your server and then live reload your server whenever there's a change, so you don't have to manually stop and then restart it. So let's say npm install -g to install it globally. Nodemon. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to reinstall it, but if you don't have that, just go ahead and install that. Now we're going to install our app level dependencies, and we have 3 app level dependencies. The first is, so we can npm install express, which is basically what we're going to, it's the node package we're going to use to basically create our API. And now we're also going to need our compromise library, which is the natural language processing library. And then there's also a compromise extension called compromise sentences that we need to install. So let's go ahead and run that. So now let's create basically our backend server file. Let's work on the server stuff first. So let's say new file, index.js. And now here, we're going to import a few packages. So let's say const http, which is basically going to be the package that we're actually going to use to basically spin up the server. And let's say, let's get our port variable here. So let's say const port equals, let's run it on port 3000. Let's import express. Const express equals require express. And let's get express router in here. So let's say const router equals express.router. And what this router is basically what we're going to create our API contract with, the contract we saw earlier. We're going to use this router variable to create our get route in order to actually, take in some sentence and convert it to past tense. And let's also import our path module. So say require path. And now let's create our actual express app. So let's say const app equals express, calling the express method here. And now let's import compromise. So we're going to store our compromise reference in a variable called NLP. NLP equals require compromise. And now we're going to extend compromise with that compromise sentences extension we installed. So let's say nlp.extend require compromise sentences. All right, so we've imported some packages here. Now let's set up a piece of middleware on our Express app. One of the middlewares that we're going to need is we need to tell Express where to find our front end files, so that when we visit localhost at port 3000, we're going to need to tell Express where to actually find the front end files to serve up. So we can do that with app.use express.static. We're telling Express where to find the static files at for the front end. We're going to use path.join __ dir name, which is basically a variable that represents the current directory that we're in. And we're going to look for a public folder. We haven't created it yet, but this is all that this is doing. It's telling Express, okay, where can I find static files to serve up when the user visits localhost at port 3000? So now we can actually create that folder. So let's say new folder, public, and just to start off, let's just create index.html. So now whenever the user visits the server, Express is going to look in this public folder. That's what this line is. It's telling Express to look at this public folder, and it's going to serve up files from this folder. Okay, cool. All right, so that's the only piece of middleware that we're going to need at this point. All right, so at this point, we've imported some packages, we've set up some middleware. Now let's actually create the server instance. So let's go down here and let's say http.create_server, and we're going to pass in our app instance, our Express app instance, and we're going to say listen. And now we need to tell it what port to listen on, and we're going to use this port variable from earlier. We're going to listen on port 3000, and we're going to give it a callback function to run after the server is started. So let's say console log listening on port, and we'll give it whatever port we have here. It's going to be 3000. Okay, so let's save that, and let's actually try to run this, see what it does. So we're going to run this by saying nodemon index. Okay, so looks like our nodemon was successful. We've logged listening on port 3000, so that must mean our server is started. So let's go on over to the browser to see what's going on. All right, so over here in our browser, let's navigate to localhost at port 3000. All right, so not a whole lot going on. As you can see, it's blank. It's not giving us an error page, but it is blank. It is actually serving up the index.html file from our public folder from earlier, but we haven't actually put anything in that file. As you can see, it's blank. So let's actually put something in here. All right, so we're going to use the !tab shortcut to get some boilerplate going here. And in here, let's just put a h1 to say DevSage. And let's save that, and let's go back to the browser and let's reload. And as you can see, we have DevSage here. Okay, so we basically got the basics of our server set up. So let's actually start working on and building out our front end, and we can come back and finish up the server side stuff. Okay, so first off, let's create our style sheet and our external JavaScript files. So let's say new file. Let's call this style.css. And let's also create another file in the public folder called script.js. And let's go back to index.html, and let's go and import these files. So let's import the style sheet. So let's say link, and we're going to say style.css, and at the bottom we're going to import the script.js. Okay, now let's actually get to work on creating some of the front end UI stuff. So let's go underneath, let's get rid of this DevSage here, and let's create a div with the class of container. And inside of this, we're going to say h1, and this is going to be past tense if fire. I'm going to make up a word. And underneath that, we're going to create a paragraph that basically says convert a sentence to past tense using natural language processing. And we're actually going to put this inside of an italic tag as well. Okay. Now underneath this, we're going to need to put our input text box here that's going to actually take in our input sentence that we want to translate to past tense. So let's say input type of text, and we're going to give it a name of sentence. And now underneath that, we're going to create the div that's going to be used to display the output. So let's say div we're going to give this div an ID of output. Okay, so let's go back here. Let's see how this looks so far. All right, so all the stuff is here, but it's not pretty. We have to style it. So let's focus on styling that. So let's go over to style.css, and first off, let's say HTML body. We're going to change the background. So let's say background hashtag ECE8E0, kind of an off-white. And let's change the font family. Let's give it a font family of Arial, and we can get rid of this Helvetica. All right, and let's set the height to 100%, and let's basically create a flex container, making the HTML and the body a flex container so that we can vertically and horizontally align the this div to make it like in the center instead of in the top left over here. So let's say display inline flex, align items center, justify content center. Okay, so let's save that and let's see what this does. All right, so we're getting a little bit better. We changed our background to this kind of off-white color, and we've centered horizontally and vertically our information here. We still need to do a little bit more styling to get it where we want it. So let's go back over here and let's style our container div. Let's say text align center, and let's give it a width of 600 pixels. And let's also style our output container, which we can't immediately see off the bat, but let's put the margin top to be 10 pixels. Let's change the background to be light blue, and let's upgrade the font size to 20 pixels. And also now let's style our actual input type text. And now let's give it a width of 100%. Let's give it some padding of 10 pixels, a border radius of 25 pixels, text align center, border 1 pixel solid. Let's give it AAA, and let's upgrade the font size a little bit. Okay, so now let's go back. Okay, so this UI is looking pretty good for right now. So let's shift our focus from styling and actually working on some of the JavaScript needed to actually take in a string and then send a fetch request back to the server. So let's go over to our script.js, and one of the things we need to do is we need to actually the way we're going to submit a sentence from the front end to the back end is we're going to type something in here, and we're going to press enter here, and that's going to trigger a request to get sent to the backend server, which is then going to calculate the past tense version and send it back. So what we need to do is we need to set up an event listener on this input to basically listen for any key presses. And if we determine that we have an enter key press, great, let's just grab whatever's in here and send it to the backend. So let's go over here and let's say document.query selector, and we're going to select using the name, the attribute selector here. So let's say name equals sentence, and this is going to grab the this sentence input here, and we're going to say add event listener. We're going to listen for a key up event, and we're going to say, I'm going to give it that handler, and we're going to, if we determine that the key that we pressed for this key up event, if we determine that it is the enter key, then we want to actually go about, sending the fetch request to the backend. If the key is not the enter key, that's fine. We don't need to do anything at the moment. We'll just keep letting them type. So let's say if event.which equals 13. And this is basically saying event.which is going to get the key code of the key that was pressed. And the key code for the enter key is key 13. So what we're saying here is if we did not press key 13, if we did not press the enter key, then what we want to do is we just want to return. We don't need to do anything. But if we get underneath here, then that must mean we pressed the enter key. Then that means we actually need to go about getting the information out the text box and sending it to the server. So let's say down here, let's say const request equals await fetch, and we're going to pass in, remember our API contract, we're going to send this to the past tense route, and we're going to attach a query string of let's say let's actually make this a template string so we can directly inject a variable here. So let's say new URL search params, and we're going to pass in an object, and we're going to give it sentence, and this is going to equal event.target.value. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're sending a fetch request to the past tense route, and we're attaching the sentence query string parameter, and we're doing that using this new URL search params here. And one thing we need to do is, since we're using the await keyword, we actually need the async keyword here on our function. So this should send a request to the server, but we actually haven't set this route up yet. So let's go back to our index.js for our server, and let's set up that route. So let's go underneath our middleware here, and let's use the router variable that we haven't used yet, and let's say router.get. We're going to say /past tense, and we're going to pass in our handler. It's going to be a callback to take in the request and the response. And now let's just console log request.query. And then for right now, let's just res.send. Okay. So whenever this past tense route is hit, it's just going to console log whatever the query string values are. And it's just going to send back okay in the response. And actually, there's one more thing we need to do here. We actually need to say app.use/ and then pass in router so that it's actually connected to our app. Okay, so let's save and reload that. And now let's see if we can actually pass some information from our front end here to our server. So if we say test and we press enter, in our console over here in our server, we can see that we've console logged test and we have sentence here. So sentence is being passed in via that URL search param here, sentence, and it's being caught in the server whenever we log request.query here. Okay, cool. So we're officially passing information from the front end to the back end. So now we need to take that information and actually connect it to our NLP library and run it through the past tense algorithm, and then send the past tense version back up to the front end. All right, so let's get the past tense version of our sentence. So the first thing we're going to do, let's get rid of this. So let's say let doc equals NLP, and we're going to pass in request.query.sentence. And now we're going to say doc.sentences.toPastTense. And now we're going to extract the text out of that. We're going to say const text equals doc.text. Okay, so at this point, we just ran our query string sentence, whatever our sentence was in the query string here, we ran it through the past tense algorithm, and we've extracted the text, and now we're holding that text in the text variable here. So let's console log text, and let's save that, and let's go back to the front end, and let's pass through let's say I am reading a book, and let's pass that in, and let's press enter. And back on the server side, as you can see, we printed out I read a book. So we have our past tense version of I am reading a book. It's being ran through the NLP algorithm, and it's coming back as I read a book. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to pass this past tense version back up to the front end. So the way we do that is we can send it back using res.json, and we can use this to send back some JSON object that can be parsed out on the front end. So in this case, we can say text. We're sending back a property text that has the value of whatever this text variable is, but we can actually shorthand this and just pass through text by itself. And JavaScript is smart enough to figure it out that we just want to send an object literal back with the property of text, which has the value of this text variable. Okay, so back on the front end in script.js, we're sending the request here. Let's actually get the response back out that has the past tense version of it. So let's say const past tense equals await request.json. Let's console log past tense just to make sure it's actually coming back to the front end all right. And let's say I am watching TV, and let's open the console, and as you can see, let's press enter. Looks like we have an error here. So the server responded with a status of 404. Let's refresh. Okay, looks like we had just a small issue here. So let's say I am watching TV. Okay, so now we have I watched TV. So let's say we said I am writing a novel. I wrote a novel. Okay, so we're almost done. So instead of printing out the past tense version in the console, let's actually print it out on the actual DOM here. So let's go back here, and on our front end we can get rid of this, and we can say document.querySelector, and we're going to select our output, which right now it's invisible, but our output div is actually underneath the input here. Once we actually put some text inside of it, it should display. So let's say output dot inner HTML equals past tense dot text. Okay, let's save that, and let's go back over here, and now let's actually refresh, and let's say I'll stand up and fight. As you can see, I stood up and fought. Let's say say hello to my little friend. Said hello to my little friend. We can put I'm reading a book and it's really good. I read a book and it was really good. Okay, so we have our natural language processing app. It's functional at this point. We're passing in a regular sentence in the input. When we press enter, it gets sent to the server, and it runs that sentence through the natural language processing library, converts it to past tense, sends the past tense version back up to the front end, and we display it right here. Cool. So one thing I want to point out is even though this is pretty cool, it's definitely not perfect. For example, I could say something like, I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. And if I try to run this, the first part looks all right. I made you an offer you could have did not refuse. So you can see we got some confusion going on here. Could have, did not refuse. So it's definitely not perfect. This compromise library is not is not a real human, but it tries really hard. But it's definitely a starting point when it comes to dipping your toes into natural language processing and AI and stuff like that. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. The link for this project is going to be in GitHub, so just scroll down and check the description for the GitHub link. Be sure to leave a star and follow me on GitHub if you want. But yeah, if you like this video, be sure to leave a like. Subscribe if you want to see more web dev explained simply. And yeah, peace.